I'm just going to check my door again. I'm having OCD moments.
Skib. Energy.
I'm still here. Okay, 1 second.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to do a little bit of a discussion on, they don't want to call it a discovery, but some observations and things that are going on in the OP community that really could only possibly come about because we're all typed and we're all seeing how people of types and the patterns and things that are happening. So does someone want to take it away, what we're actually talking about here?
Yeah, I think it's just like I think that's a perfect way to introduce it. These are just discoveries that we're coming across as we're like talking to people in the Discord, and we're seeing like how do different types interact when you can kind of see what types they are. And one thing we've noticed is that we can really get a sense of when an info conversation is taking place and when an energy conversation is taking place. And of course, info DOMs will have energy conversations and vice versa. But one of the major kind of sources of confusion or conflict or like misunderstandings is people having trying to have an info conversation and then maybe there won't be clarity. And so that will so we'll talk about that. And just some of the observations that we're kind of looking to explain is that what we've noticed in the Discord and people interacting is that, for example, like blast last, you would think would be that it's double activated consume would be very triggered by someone who's blasty, who's double activated blast. But that's not the case. They actually get along really well. And same thing with sleep last and play last. They're also have like some kind of like natural like fluid interaction. And the thing that we're talking about is that, those are basically because they know there's certain assumptions in an energy conversation or energy interaction, and there's certain assumptions in an info interaction that they intuitively know. So we're going to talk about what that is. And basically the crux of the matter, is that an energy conversation is kind of about sharing your identity and how the tribe kind of reacts to it. And an info conversation is kind of sharing your observations and kind of summarizing them and kind of like coming to a conclusion on information back and forth. And the crazy thing is you really can't do both at the same time, because if you're putting yourself out there, like in an energy conversation, like I'm sharing my impressions and I'm not like backing it up, right? I'm just gonna share who I am and assuming that the environment is kind of like non-judgmental. And then if someone comes in and is like, oh, you're sharing some facts. I've not seen that thing in my life. Here are some examples. It's like, whoa, it kind of feels like you're like kind of acting like it feels you're invalidating my personal experience, right?
So the line that we're drawing here though is between info versus energy DOM, right? And so what we're really talking about is like, okay, you got the double activated blast and then the blast last. Those are the energy DOMs, right? And how are they not triggering each other even though they've got something that seems to be triggering, right?
Right.
That's really your first observation, right?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Ikraam, you're muted, I think.
Ikraam, you're muted.
Yeah, so the the double activated consumes and the double activated blast, they have a certain chemistry together when they're talking, and the theory kind of would tell you that would be the opposite, and it's the same thing. So the three of us felt the same thing when we talk. Uzair is double activated sleep. Danielle is also double activated sleep, and it's like, I thought if sleep is what's supposed to be triggering me, then why do I feel like I have really good conversations with both of them? So me and Kat talked about this. And it's because we have a bond over consume and blast. And so the energy DOM and the info DOM coin is something historically I never understood, and I've never been able to utilize when typing. But through through observing the community and like the Discord conversations that were happening in the Discord, and like kind of like tiffs and then like things that would trigger some people and then wouldn't trigger other people, a pattern emerged. And that pattern was that the energy DOMs, when they're talking, they're processing their identity and their sleep story, but they're playing it out. It's like casual conversation for them is to talk about like, this is what happened to me, this is my hopes, my dreams, like this is my subjective view of the world. And then you don't, the other energy DOMs don't push up on that too much. They'll engage with that story kind of and like get their bring their own little insights, but they won't give like observations about it. The info DOMs, when we talk, it's straight up like somebody says something about information, an observation that they had, and then we kind of pick it apart together and nobody gets offended, kind of.
Which is
but
kind
the
of how
character
we
thing
also
is
we also ended up here. You know, what is that?
Yeah.
What is what the energy DOMs are doing? And then we had an info conversation about it.
Yeah.
To understand it, which is kind of how I guess infodoms also have to understand like the social game of play and sleep, right? Like that you kind of ultimately what we discovered is that if you're only sharing information, you're not actually ever sharing sleep, or you're trying not to. That's like the aim of an info conversation, is to not share self, right? And even the way that we navigate social situations is by infoing it out. And what I mean by that is like we can understand social interaction through a formula that we've like distilled through observations over time. But generally speaking, it does seem like all of us kind of struggle more in that realm, because there's an instinct that's telling you that sharing a personal opinion, and you can kind of detect when that is, just, oh, I don't like that, or oh, I don't like that, then that is just not allowed to be part of conversation, if that makes sense. And I guess for energy DOMs, just kind of flipping it around, it makes us seem quite like we're not engaged in the conversation personally, right? There's like I guess what people would say is like there's a barrier or a veil kind of keeping us from actually engaging ourselves, and like putting ourselves on the line.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then just like a comment on like why do you have, if you're infodom, you have to have a sleep or play blast, not because of OP math, but because there's no room for it, right? Like if you're having a conversation, which is abrasive, right? It's like, oh, this is what I think. Well, I don't know if I here's some examples where that contradicted. Well, I'll take those examples, and then I think it fits in. I'll adjust my theory a little bit, and then I'll share it back to you, and then Ben, I know you've gotten the comment that you're very like direct, right? I think a lot of that reaction is just an informal conversation. Like I definitely don't have that response to you, right? So
yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
I just think it's great, you know, like I appreciate that. And I guess like tying into this is I wrote a post like in March where I kind of saw how Blast is always targeting sleep, right? Like Blast, the animal of Blast is always trying to move sleep. So it makes sense that if you're an infodom, especially if you or if you have Blast third, like all of us do, we're gonna be especially triggering to people that have, let's say, sleep third, which is then demon sleep, right? So that interaction is going to be maximum abrasive because of how insecure the sleep is and how much info is going into the blast, and it's trying to like adjust the known info.
I've heard you talk about that before. Let's pick that apart a little bit because I'm sure people won't be able to follow that. It's like, okay, so what you're talking about, moving sleep. So let's talk about what moving sleep is. Why would that be something that an energy dom would resist, or even an info dom would resist? What is that? Yeah,
I think another way to describe what you said, Kat, is that you, the third animal, you have a lot of pressure on it, right? So like in your case, you've done the consume, which is like your impressions and your kind of reactions to things, right? And you've kind of like gathered other experiences from other people, and then you're narrowing it down to an OI, and in kind of avoiding to do sleep, you are doing blast. And then a person who is sleep third is kind of they have a lot of pressure on their sleep, right?
Yes.
And so that's going to be a kind of a conflict. And in this case, if you have blast and they don't have blast, they'll feel kind of imposed upon because you are sharing your OI, right? And because you're verbalizing it out loud, it is imposing on them, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, you might feel the same way because they're doing the kind of they're giving their feeling about your problems or you or whatever, right? And you might feel like you're just kind of, I'm at least giving you arguments and I'm that you can pick apart. You're just giving me your impression, and then that'll be a very common conflict.
And and then the giving of the impression, it feels like projection, and it's hurtful for some, especially if you have sleep blast, because it feels like I don't do that to you. Why are you doing it to me? Kind of like I don't have all these like I give you the benefit of the doubt to like talk to me about things before I come to a conclusion on you. And then with people with sleep, it's like, oh, so you just like you think you already know me, kind of, or like you're projecting this image onto me. It feels that's the part of energy domness, I guess, that feels like triggering to infodoms.
So one thing I've noticed in myself, at least, is when someone actually does see my sleep, like when I'm not being projected upon, but someone actually does see my sleep. That's like a compliment. That's like, oh, you actually see me.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
So how do you like understand that? Like, because we're constantly trying to hide our sleep, but then if someone sees it, it's something good.
It's very special. Yeah, it's a special moment, I think, because if your sleep lasts, also the problem with it is, right, that you and especially for me and Ikraam, it being double masculine, we have very specific subconscious preferences that we are completely unaware of. And the sleep last life is like running around and kind of you're in all kinds of contexts, whether you like them or not, whether they align with your sleep or not. So sometimes when you are in a context, and I've described this as like, sometimes when I meet people, I feel as if I don't have to change my frequency, right? To adapt to them. And all of a sudden it just aligns with me. And I'm like, I'm actually comfortable in this setting. And that's never something I'm actually checking. So when someone does see my sleep and they're like, oh, I see you for who you are, it's a very special moment because it's not allowed to be part of social interaction.
And that's kind of us like looking at sleep or play as kind of identity, or like your Ben, you had a good word for it, like persona and identity, right? Like persona being your kind of outward, what people kind of see you as, and identity is who you really are, whatever. We're weird about that, right? This conversation, like if Energy Dom is like, oh, finally they saw my real self, you know, it's like, relax, you know, like they might have that reaction.
They're sharing it all day. Of course people are going to see.
They're sharing it. And so like that's infodoms having kind of energy or identity kind of freakouts or being imbalanced on it, right? And part of that is also because we either only have like one DI or one like DE on the sleep and blast side, right? And then on the flip side, it's like, oh, because like what Ikraam, like what we're describing about this, right? This like, oh, people are like, they're just giving my impression, or you're projecting on me. Like this is all kind of judgment on identity, right? And it's like, okay, it makes sense for me or Ben to talk about that. We're deciders. Why is it that the observers who are infodoms also feel that, this kind of like decider feeling? And it's because like infodoms will be more double observery in that way, because your information and your worldview and your self-belief, you're constantly sharing it. People are pushing back on it. And so your information will be kind of like checked, and you're not going to have any big surprises about that. On the flip side, because you're not sharing your identity, you'll be surprised about like, oh my God, this is who I really am. Or, oh my God, that's how people see me, right? There'll be like a weirdness on that. On the flip side, the energy doms will have info freakouts of like, oh, I'm leaving the church, or oh, I need to set the record straight, or oh my God, what if, you know, like how do I like verify that this OP is real, or whatever, right? Like when they question OP, like the infodoms, like as Kat mentioned, like why the hell did none of us really accept all of our types, right? Like another way to interpret all this thing that we're doing today is like, finally, the parts that we don't relate to on our type, we have a great theory that explains a little bit more, you know what I mean? Whereas the energy doms,
we're looking for the info on why our type is right.
Yeah. Like we need little asterisks, you know, like it's not, it can't take it straight from David Shannon and be like, oh, okay, of course there's gonna be parts I don't relate to, but I'll deal with those in sleep, you know? No, that's not okay. I need to push back on it and come up with a new OI if that's what's needed to explain all the SE, including my little identity that's part of that, right?
And
you do say
there's a pattern of, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that there's, maybe you're saying the same thing, but there's a pattern of infodoms disagreeing with their type, but also trying to convince people of who they are. Like that's through blast, like this is who I am. This is who I am. And there's really nervous energy around that, because it's the sense that like you never share your sleep. So when you do it and it comes out through blast, it's so desperate. It's like almost a desperate need to also be seen. But it's not just, oh, this was my experience in this situation, and someone else kind of pings back on that. It's like, no, this is what happened. I know what happened, and this is why. And then you have a list of arguments for why you were kind of right in that case or whatever.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit crazy.
Yeah, but energy doms, like the consume last, they're the good thing about them is that an observation is that they are a little bit weird about releasing their type, right? It's because they have a sense of like, oh, this will change my identity of how I see myself and how I am seen by people. And so if I kind of share this information, people will see me different and treat me different. And like, how do I feel about that? You know, like there's processing that needs to be done before they share the type. And the sleep last was just kind of like, generally, I think we'll just like, unless they disagree with it in an info way, right? Sorry, Ikraam, what were you gonna say?
I was going to harken back to the decider and observer coin for Energy Dom and Info Dom. So what Catherine described is kind of more of a decider like issue with OPS, kind of like, oh, like you're telling me who I am, but this is not matching up, and like nobody sees me. I feel invisible or whatever. But you're always protecting the self, so you're not like whatever. Whether you're play last or sleep last, that's kind of the vibe. But with the energy doms, there's a pattern of energy doms completely rejecting OPS completely, you know, like this is like taking it in too much kind of, or like taking it in whole and like letting it like kind of drive their lives, you know, without too much verification, or saying everything's bunk and it's like a cult and it's all that.
Or nothing
so it's like,
imbalanced.
That's an observer issue. So I think I just remembered that. I was like, wow, that is actually a pretty good example.
That's a really good example, right?
It is a good example, and that's why, I mean, info dominance is a type of double observing, and energy dominance is a type of double deciding in a way. Ish.
Yeah.
It makes sense that sleep and play are decider animals, and then consume and blast are then observation animals, right?
Yeah, because when our blast, when we're pushing back on like this, we still have a little bit more to go, right? We're like, you know, finally, you know, if people don't accept it, or people are like, nah, you are that type, or here's examples, and it's like, oh crap, fine, let me think about it. Like if you sleep last, fine, or like if you play last, it's like, all right, that's how people see me. Fuck. Okay, you know what?
Right.
But if you're blast last, then your last thing is that it's a cult. I'm going to push back. This is not okay. You know what I mean? It's like, it's what Ikraam is describing is you might, like people hearing it might think that, oh, this is a consume last issue, right? That like, oh, that they disagree. It's actually, from my experience, is the blast last that take a big issue with like, because they're not able to go back and forth on like, oh, hey, here's the parts that I disagree with here, or not that they're not able to, but they struggle with that.
Yeah.
They will have the freak out of like, oh my God, like if they do doubt it, right? If they do doubt like whatever worldview, or let's say it's OP, it's like, oh my God, like Ikraam was saying, it's like, I built so much of my identity around this. And like, if parts of it are not what I thought it was, or my interpretation is wrong, or they're wrong, like, that's really like shakes them, I guess, you know?
Yeah, there is a nervousness around the information. So like classically info doms are supposed to take the info seriously, right? But then for some reason, the energy doms are taking info way more seriously in some way. And it does look like some kind of observer imbalance, right? So do you have some kind of explanation on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because they're not going back for, they either feel like they're not allowed to go and change the information, right? Blast is like, there's a collective OI, right? This is not my OI. That's not sleep. This is the OI that we all share, and that's relevant to everybody, that explains everyone's problems, right? And if you don't feel like you can be part of that discussion, then you have to be like, I'm going to leave the church, or I'm going to like, I don't accept any of this, or like, that's not what I'm about, or you know what I mean? This doesn't resonate with me, or whatever it is, right? Like part of what we're doing right now is that like, yeah, there's parts of OP that doesn't resonate with me. It's like, oh, and this part, like this part does explain it to like this group of people, and hopefully more. And then, you know, maybe this turns into something like this kind of language that I don't know, David Shan might talk about, right? Like that'd be great. And that's because we're part of that discussion, kind of pushing it. I think that hopefully like the info doms, I think are also guilty about maybe pushing it too hard, right? And making it feel like it's antagonistic, but hopefully it's constructive rather than you know, anything like that.
Yeah. And
guess
also with
another thing.
the, so we talked about the, sorry, go ahead.
No. I think I'm changing channels. So go ahead.
I was just gonna slightly say, so we talked a lot about how blast last, like that's the blast last solution is the kind of leave, and that's why they have an information tidal wave. Like it's like, okay, this is, I can't handle this, I have to jump ship, kind of. The consume last, how we see that happening with consume last is that because they have like all these conscious or unconscious, I'm not sure, blocks to information, because they have the blast, they have the convincing of others. So it's like a lot of times when they're convincing of others, like they'll have a story of like, oh, like you're like not hearing what I'm having to say. Like you're being stubborn, or like you're trying to twist what I'm saying to fit your theory or whatever. So when you have all that energy going against what the person is saying, of course, the time that you finally take the info in, it's going to be like, fuck, you know? So it's like, I think it's like, it's almost like action and inaction, you know? Like I know the energy animals are like sleep and play, but like the blast is like it's almost like they're taking on too much shit. Like they're like, okay. And then there's like the seething feeling, like their hand is on the stove and they're like, okay, fuck. I'm jumping out. Like I can't do this anymore. And then the blast is like pushing, and then like letting go. And like, okay, like now I have to take this in. So that's it's like both are in a pressure cooker situation. And then the thing that tips them over is the information.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, that's it's interesting about like crap. I was gonna say it's I think we can also talk about like the kind of like feedback loops of how your last animal, or if you're info and energy, how it affects your other animals, how it affects your consume, how it affects your blast, and vice versa. So I think because like all infodoms are going to be expected to blast, like we're all blast third, right? This is a very blasty thing that we're like, oh, we got to do this, right? Like where is that going from? We still have like quite an impulse to come out and share what our thoughts are, right? And so if you're going to have that, and you're opting in saying it's okay when I share my thing that you can poke holes in it, then your consume, it's not generally going to be feeding into like the stuff that you like, because you have this need for that consume to defend your blast so much, right? And so your consume will be kind of like very like it'll be like public facts, right? It'll be stuff that's going to be relevant to everybody, or stuff that's going to be understandable to everyone. Not necessarily, but just like, because that's what your stack is going towards, especially even more if you're sleep last, right? Because then it's just like your obligation is first to prove it, then have it like resonate, have stuff just resonate with you, right?
Yeah. Once the information is correct, then you bring it to the identity.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's why we're so obsessive, I think, like going into OP and then trying to prove our type, and then understanding what info dominance is doing and how our brains work. Because like it's also like a fundamental understanding of your cognitive makeup, kind of. And then it's like, oh, now I can do sleep, because now I see like how this is actually playing out in my life, and I can call, you know, once I have a complete understanding of the information in my life, what is consume, what is play, what is blast, then you can actually apply it and you can update your sleep, and then you're set free. Kind of that's the sensation. Like when we first had this conversation, it was like, oh my god, we can finally do it, you know, especially me and Ikraam. I think it's like I you know, now sleep makes sense to us, because I mean, it's on some level, it's like you want to kind of understand as closely as possible what's objectively true in information, and then you can apply it and put it into sleep.
Yeah,
it's never
what's really confusing. What's really confusing to me as well is like Uzair resonates with all of this stuff as well. Like he resonates with exactly the struggles you're having on the identity, even though his identity is double activated. Like, I mean, his sleep is double activated. So like, even if someone was to see you, Uzair, and see your sleep, that's like a compliment, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like me. So I might be aware of my identity, right? And then that's why if I'm aware of my identity and I have blast, what am I going to do? I'm going to try to like, I'm not just going to like throw my identity out there and see where it lands. And oh, people love this. Like, no, I'm going to like throw it out there and like, you know, nudge it a little bit, and, you know. And so once you start doing that, you kind of lose the play. You know, that's the kind of whole point of play. And so when I feel like I throw it out there and I didn't do anything and it landed well, I'm like, oh, I didn't have to do the thing that I do usually, you know? Of course, part of that is going to be IP, but I do think part of that is just like the play last of like, I don't want to make a mistake. And it's like, oh, the feeling of that I can be sloppy somewhere is, it is a comforting feeling, because it's just like your day job is to not be sloppy, you know? So like going back on the kind of reciprocal, like I think because and let's talk a little bit about like what the energy DOMs are really looking for is kind of like this resonance. Then you shared this great little clip from Joyce's interview with Gray, and it was actually really like
I'll put the link in the description with the timestamp. Yeah.
That was really like, I really like what she said actually. And it's something that maybe we as infodoms don't really do so much, but she's like, it's really important to kind of like shine your beacon and who you are, so that it attracts other people who resonate with that. Otherwise, like, how are you going to find people who you can be like that, this kind of easy thing that I'm describing, unless you kind of, you know, like put yourself out there and kind of like let people be drawn to that.
I mean, not to that's what I was saying before about like having trouble in interpersonal relationships because of that, right? Because if you're never sharing sleep, then of course, like, either you're unaware of it or you're not actually projecting who you are out into the world. You're going to be in all kinds of contexts, even the play lasts, right? Where that may or may not align with them. And ultimately, not to go too feelery about this, but I do think that it kind of leads to a very lonely life for a lot of infodoms, because we're not obligated for things to align with us or not. We're obligated to kind of go out, perhaps as blast third, but to go out and like do the thing and help, you know, and try to like give information to people that can benefit them, right? Ironically, that's also abrasive to do, so it doesn't always resonate with people, so then you will also struggle in that realm, you know. And I do think that the general, and not to go too far on this, but like an energy dominant thing and like how they see infodoms is, generally speaking, like they can see us as like soulless creatures, because we're never sharing that inner world. Or that's how we seem, right?
And another miscommunication is that I think what us as infodoms might take pride in is that, no, I'll kind of share my ideas with anyone. Like, I will defend my idea with someone who disagrees with me and doesn't like me. You know what I mean? And so it's like, but the downside of that, right? So the plus side of that is like, okay, that means the people that you're around, that you talk to or you're around, they're really kind of challenging your beliefs and your worldview, right? Maybe they're not challenging because you're not sharing who you are. They're not challenging that so much, right? Which is what the energy DOMs are good at, because they're getting that, right? But the downside of that is that if you have like, because you're okay with talking to people you don't resonate with, if an energy DOM is like reaching out to you and it's like, oh, hey, you know, you seem cool and I want to talk to you, and sure, you want to talk about this info crowd, sure, let's talk about it. And you're like, yes, I'm sharing information. You request for information, I will give you information, right?
Yes.
And then a little bit down the road, they're like, we're not even friends. And I was like, I thought we were just sharing information, you know? And like that will feel like a betrayal, which I think it is a betrayal, to be fair.
I do feel as an infodom that if you can align with people on information in some way, like get to the same page in information, then you've gotten into their sleep. Like then you know what's driving them. You know what's at the base of their core.
Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with people that understand the world the way that I understand the world. And when that happens, I'm like, this is a person I want in my life, you know? That's the instinctual reaction. It's like, we can have a conversation, we can have an intellectual conversation. And then later on, we will share sleep with each other. But the connection is over info first.
And the energy DOMs can be the opposite, right? They also have info conversations. Like David Chan obviously have lots of info conversations, right? But it's like people that they resonate with, and then they'll have info conversations.
Have you noticed that the info conversations between the energy DOMs, what they're actually sharing in terms of info when they're having those conversations?
It's known info, I would say. Like the way that I see it as an infodom, it's information that they haven't been given and it hasn't been reiterated upon. So it's almost like an echo of something that someone else has said. That's what it sounds like to my ears, at least.
Yeah, I think that the way they validate it is that it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't use that, like that doesn't resonate with me, and then it kind of has the same effect, right? But it's not as obviously like quick, snappy, backy, right? Because it's just like if I share a theory and they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't really vibe with that, right? You can go in and then the individual can like go in and fix it themselves, right? It's not, I'm not giving you the tools to be like, this is what's wrong with it, like you, or not always. Of course, everyone does everything, you know what I mean? But generally, that's not the way the conversation flows.
Yeah.
And of course, it can't, right?
It happens to me a lot too, where I get accused of arguing when I try to pick apart the info and figure out the info. Yeah, that happens to you. What's that about?
Always. My someone the other day told me that I was provoking them, right? And I was like, I'm just trying to have a conversation, you know? And and I guess what I think especially what I react the strongest to is sleep reports, right? Like perception of self. And I'm like, is that really true? And then what the energy DOMs will do is that they'll leave it be and say, well, this person has the right to their own sleep narrative. And for me, that's like, no one has the right to a sleep narrative that's not accurate. And of course, that's abrasive. Like that is an abrasive thing. But from my point of view, I'm thinking if I share my sleep, right? When I consciously try to do so, I want people to blast at me so I can know if it's true or not, right? And so when someone gives me nothing, then I'm offended because I'm like, oh, you're invalidating the story that I'm telling you. Like you're not saying yay or nay, like I'm getting nothing from you. But when I then give feedback on energy DOM sleep, then of course that's offensive because if you're an energy DOM, you have the right then to have your sleep, and that's how you see the world. It's like it's people living kind of a little bit in their own worlds with their known info, and that's kind of how you vibe with people. And I
think what we're interpreting as sleep, right? We're interpreting their sleep as blast, right? Because they're verbalizing it. It's not that we're like, oh, you think this, and it's like, no, you're saying it out loud, and then now I have to respond to it, or people are going to believe you, and I have to push back on it. When that's not really what they're doing, right? Like we interpret everything that is verbalized as that, you know. And to be fair, it is uncomfortable to have your arguments like. It's like I'll name names, whatever. Like talking to Reggie, you know, it's like it's not a relaxing conversation. It's just like, oh well, technically, what about this and da da da. What about this? Like sweating bullets at the end of it. Like, oh, got through that. You know, it's like I don't think it's comfortable for anyone.
Raised eyebrows. He's like, I don't think Reggie will care, but yeah.
But I think we also don't like it, you know. But it's just like we put ourselves in the situation.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it.
But
I think
I was just gonna say on kind of what I said before, but also when we do share sleep, it's incredibly conscious and it's always up to us. So I do think we have some kind of image management going on at all times, right? Which is like, well, I control my identity. If I want to see it corrected, is like, am I seeing myself the way that the world is seeing me? That's us consciously going to someone and saying, give me feedback, right? It's like a very, very specific event, and it's like it has a lot of tension to it. So
but the problem with infodoms is that, just to like shit on us a little bit, right? What energy doms would say to that is that you're coming to me for information, but you're really just trying to validate your sleep, your sleep, right? Because what we'll screw up on our last animal is that, okay, there's a need for OI, right? I'm going to pick on you guys for a second. There's a need for OI, and just like instead of just like going back and like crying in the bathroom or like just dealing with yourself, like you're feeling the need to call me and tell me. It's like, well, I don't believe whatever you want. What are you putting this on me, right? That's how the energy doms will feel. And so, and I'll also do that as play last, because it's just like, oh, I know how that came off, and just let me just explain a little bit more, and you know what I mean, like. It's for us, right? This is where like you're doing the sake of info for your identity, right? That's when it's mixed.
I do feel though that our sleep is harder to see than maybe, because we're not broadcasting it all the time, and because we're not trying to align with how we're being perceived all the time, that we have the permission to go off and be a different person. We have we have that permission for the depth.
Yeah.
I don't
disagreeing.
I would disagree. I would disagree. And this is why. So the whole idea, so earlier Catherine was talking about how we do have sleep, of course, you know, everyone has sleep. We kind of have to do the infodom thing before we hit sleep. And so think about how inefficient that is. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're getting a teaspoon of sleep for all of this interaction. And so it makes sense that we actually do have less sleep. Like that we have something, and the sleep that we do have is like outdated and it's like wrong and all that stuff, you know? And the overdoing, so like what is the purpose of this entire conversation or this discovery kind of, like what use could somebody get from this, is that like the more that you respect information as an info dominant, the more sleep last or play last you'll be. And the more you disrespect information as an energy dominant, the more like shit your information is going to be, you know, the more sorry, that was like really blunt. But what I'm trying to say is
so the reason why I was saying that is that like, so a lot of people will say that I'm one thing and I will know that I'm not that. I will know that I'm completely something different, and I'm completely aware of what I am and who I am. And so it's like what is this mismatch? What and why can't everyone just accept that, hey, I know who I am. If you really want to know, ask me and I'll tell you way better than you can ever observe or anyone could ever tell you, right?
I think it's two things. Number one, the problem with let's say it's sleep blast, right? We're just picking on them for a second. Is that because they have the need to blast first and before they do the sleep, so something is bothering them, right? Because there's still going to be things bothering you. But I think the thing with sleep blast is that you're not allowed to reconcile things in a way with an OI that is not applicable to everybody. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, you can't just be like, oh, and then I'm the exception and this doesn't apply to me because of this. Yeah. And my situation is different. You know, you feel the need to share your story in a way that other people are like, yep, that's what happened. Yep, that's right. Yes, you are, like, you know what I mean? Like that is the problem. But the problem is if you're doing that, everybody knows a lot of this unprocessed stuff because you're trying to get them on board, right? You're trying to get the tribe to do the sleep for you in a way, right? And so sure, maybe that's not who you really are, and that's just the stuff that you're processing, and it's like, who knows? I think with the energy dom, like if there's an energy dom here, they'd be like, dude, nobody knows anybody. You know, we're just like, put a version of yourself out, and then you get it back, and then you share a different version, you get it back. It's the same thing we do with information, right? It's just like, oh, is OP right or wrong? Is the church is this or that? It's like, I don't know, we'll just engage with it, and over time we'll figure it out. You know, like I think they have the same impression with kind of this identity thing that we still
and then Dave and Shan notice this all the time. So they notice this in my type twins, like David Goggins, Dr. Ian, and then Evie, who is just typed, right? So all of them, like, how are they DE, right? They're not giving a sleep story of like, oh, I feel insecure, or like, I feel like people are better than me. That is kind of like the energy dom side of like sharing your sleep. How do you know that they're DE and like insecure? Because they have books about like how to be secure. So it's like, you have to look through the context. And so I think that's the energy doms probably look at the info doms and see people that are kind of unaware, you know, of their identity in some way. So what's a good example for the play last? Well, I think the play last, it's like they're constantly thinking about processing how other people are viewing them and trying to sway them. But it's like kind of like if you don't have the play on board, then it's kind of obvious who you like at the end of the day, sleep and play is necessary for people to see who you are, right? So for example, Ben, you were saying like, oh, like, why don't people just have a conversation with me to figure out my sleep? Well, if you just shared your sleep more, people would know who you are. And so that's kind of on us, right? With the play last, it's like, okay, show us that you're this person instead of saying that you think that you're this person and then blasting us to us about like how you're this identity when there's like no evidence.
Back on that a little bit, because like as the, you know, the being imbalanced on the identity and the persona thing, it's like when you do share your identity, you get punched back. You get rejected, right? Usually it's because your identity is so far away from what is quote unquote acceptable to the tribe, unless the tribe has all of the information that describes who you are, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more
Yeah.
information in our sleep because we need that information to produce the sleep.
Or that your identity is actually off, you know, because that's another thing that we were processing with the
Yes.
energy DOMs is like,
Yeah.
it's like why is the information bad? It's because so the blast lasters will be like, oh, like you just didn't get it, I didn't say it right. Well, you haven't said it, and like when you blast you get pushback, right? So then you update your information if it's wrong, right? So it's like it's probably not that because you didn't say it right. It could also be because you're just wrong, you know, and
So
you never know.
let's
So
bring
it's
a
the same
sensory
thing with
example.
sleep.
So
In that,
let's say
okay,
I'm
okay.
vegetarian, for example, right? So if you were to ask
Yeah.
me like about that part of my identity, I would have a book to give you. It's because there's so much information that goes behind that identity decision. And so if someone were to just be like, oh, you're like that because you just like rice or something like that, right? Like I don't know, something really dumb. It's like no, that's not how I build my identity. I build my identity based on information, and it took so I think because we're aware of the information, then we're aware of what went into our identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a better example would be like why are all this, like if you're questioning your type, you know, and it's been like years or whatever, or like you're questioning a coin and it's been a long time, why are you then automatically sleep blast, you know? It's because, like Uzair was saying, because our OI is in blast, like, and it's in information, we kind of have to fight people in order to like get to the part where we accept something, right? Whereas like you don't see any of the energy DOMs like processing their type as much, and I think it's the acceptance bit or like the whatever. I don't know how to exactly describe it, but I think the sleep bit is like, oh, I know it for myself, and that's enough, and I'll tell you why it's right for me, you know, because I don't need to get everyone else on board about the theory, because I already just accepted for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But then you would have to let that go because you would let go of the information bit a bit. Your information would be a little bit more confusing if you update it for yourself. Sorry. Anyway, I know that.
I think one way to think about it is is that for info we have both DE and DI, right? I have what people generally think about it, and then I have what my opinion is, right? And then I'll try to incorporate what my opinion is into what people think in general, right? But when it comes to identity, we don't have that balance. Like we don't have a good sense of or comfort. There's not a comfort of like, oh, this is how I'm seen, and this is who I am, right?
Yeah.
And then, oh, I'm seen this way. I see myself this way. Let's just move this a little bit, and then the tribe will move a little bit, right? Like, then what you're just kind of describing is that, but the tribe sees it this way. You know what I mean? And so, like, it's kind of like static in a way, right? And so that I think that is they just have a better balance of that. They're like, whereas again, to kind of shit on
I see
them
it
a little
really
bit.
different because I see that you, by controlling your persona, you can control how the tribe sees you 100%.
Yeah.
And you can still control who you are and who your identity is 100%. Like you have full control. Everyone has full control over both of those things. And yeah, you could try to make both of those things the same, or you could just accept that they're fundamentally different and just put energy so that the tribe will get off your back. Here, look, I'm a good person, go away. And I'm just going to go and do what the info is telling me to do on my identity side.
Yeah. And
yeah. I mean, we do that for information, right? There's gonna be stuff that I believe that is not generally believed by the public. There's gonna be stuff that's not generally believed in our smaller group, and there's gonna be stuff that I only I believe and nobody else is convinced. But to me, it's just like, oh, I've got plenty of time to kind of like have it go down the funnel, you know?
Exactly. And so there's parts of you that you wouldn't share with every single group because you know they can't accept that. They can't accept that without the info, without getting them on board with all the info. They can't accept your identity.
Yeah, but that's because you're playing the info game for the purpose of identity, right? It's like, oh, I can move the information, but I can't move the identity. Like it's a different realm of communication. I'm not really aware of it, right? So I'm just like projecting what it might be like. But that's kind of what we're doing, right? We're like we're trying to verbalize, we're trying to give the information rather than just kind of being, and the truth that comes out of like just like being around a person and kind of getting their vibe and having your impressions and having a back and forth, that is a different truth, you know?
Yeah. It's a different truth.
Yeah.
It's and I mean I've heard this said to me throughout my whole life, that depending on the situation I can reskin, like I'll reskin for a purpose, and I'll become a different person, and I'll become the persona that I need to be in that situation. So when I was typing myself, I'm like, well, I can see that I can observe in reality, like masculine TE, for example. I mean, we all kind of know what that looks like in a person without knowing OP. And I've seen it throughout my life. And I'm like, oh, if you have masculine TE, that's suitable for this purpose. I can adopt that trait for specific purposes, like when I'm at work or whenever that is, right? So it's about, like, I guess the information game is like, you're constant, especially for Sleep Last, you're constantly mapping other people, and you're seeing behavior in different people, especially as SE and I think, maybe less so with NESI, but still. And then you see that as a piece of information that you can adopt to your persona. But on the inside, you're a completely different person, because it doesn't belong to communication in your mind, right? So I think especially for Sleep Last, but no, actually double activated sleep as well, we're just vastly different people when you get to know us. And for energy DOMs, that will ultimately be very triggering, right? Because then you've spent a time with a person that then becomes a different person once you actually know them.
I don't think the energy DOMs would say that, right? They would just say that, oh yeah, that part of you is true, or like however you came off first, and then this is.
Yeah,
I've had them say that. I've had them say that to me.
They've said that to me as well. I think it's
because they're not precious about your identity, right? They don't care. It's like, no. I don't know, you're like, yeah, you're kind of the silly person, or you're the kind of like whatever, right? That's like that we find so triggering. It's just like you made an impression about. I think then on the flip side, they're like, I'm gonna move my impression. It's just like be a different way later, and then it'll change. You know, what's a big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think interesting thing about like the having DE or DI in, let's say, the energy DOM, they're missing DE or DI in information, right? So if you blast last, you kind of know what you think about a situation and your conclusions about it, right? I think Elon Musk is a good example of it going well. Like, he's not right there to kind of convince other people and get other people on board, and he's also not that aware of like he's annoyed by the fact that he has to do that and the general consensus, right? And then on the flip side, if you're consume last, one way to understand it is that you're aware of the understanding that's out there, right? Because you're doing plays like, oh, how does that work? How does that work? Oh, what do you think about that? What do you think about that, right? But you don't have a worldview that you've cultivated yourself that makes sense of the observations that you see, right? Your DI in information is missing. Like, you're just going, and then their freak out will be like, oh my God, this thing that I believe, this whatever. Just anyway, just even though we're kind of going back in our position, just wanted to make that note. And then we do the same thing on our identity side, right? I wanted to, one thing I want to say is that I think, Ikraam, you made a good point of like, oh, why is this important, right? Like, I think an energy DOM might be listening to this and be like if an energy DOM was presenting this, they'd probably focus on like, why is this important, like way earlier? Because it's like, oh, once you get all the information, all these observations, all these little cool things, you kind of will know what to do with it. You know what I mean? That part was like, what's the big deal, right?
To be honest, I really doubt an energy DOM would have made it this far in the discussion.
They probably wouldn't.
And if they did,
there's no energy DOM.
This is for the info.
This is for the infos. Shout out to the infos out there.
One last info like nugget is that about like the feedback loop. Even the double activated blast, their purpose, and you'll see this with like David Chan also, is that their purpose is for again resonance, right? It's like I'm here to inspire you. Their blast is I'm going to inspire you, right, to do something or to get this done. Whereas our blast is like, I'll convince you, and in a kind of debate way, like a Jordan Peterson kind of way, right? So that's also like how the animals will look different based on your blast.
Yeah, I've said that before, where it's like, my responsibility is to give over the info. After that, it's your job to do what you need to do. I'm like, I've done my job. Here's the info. And like, move yourself to the info. Don't move yourself to the info. Now it's on you.
Yeah. I think ultimately that was the thing. Sorry.
I was gonna say that I kind of agree with you, Ben, but for me it's like, if someone has asked for my help, or if they've expressed their need for my help, I will keep pushing until I see the result of my blast, right?
Yeah.
Ikraam, did you replace your smoke alarm batteries, by the way? Just on topic.
Huh? No. No, I didn't. Sorry, I wanted to say one thing, but ultimately that the why did I find to come back to why did I find this important, or like at least for me, is that I think that we spend at least for me, I'll be thinking about how much time I spend on perfecting the information before I'm allowed to do something with it, if that makes sense. Because like one of the things that we found really fascinating is like, why do the sleep last and the play last have a similar life struggle, right? So like it's like both of us will lose like track of our lives, if that makes sense. This is like play last, we'll talk a lot about like the unlived life kind of, and then the sleep last is like, oh, I lived the wrong life. And it's like, it's because if you're processing information so hard and you're not allowed to do sleep or play before you have everything figured out, well, that kills a lot of your time. And so I definitely, for all the infodoms out there, I don't think that you I'll just say this. I don't think that you have to get all the information perfect, and I don't think you have to convince everybody, of who you are or whatever. I think you could just kind of just, I'll be a little bit messier in that area to balance yourself out. And then with the energy DOMs, it's like I think they do really have a talent for knowing what's important, prioritizing stuff in their lives. Where I see them kind of like, where I feel a little bit nervous for them is that I think, I do think information is important, and I do think that it's a good skill to be able to convince people of your position. So just to validate what the stories you're telling yourself, if they're true or not. And also I think it's important to know if the path you're going on for the consume last, if the path you're going on is the right path. I think that it's worth a try, pausing and trying to figure out if you're wrong. So
and I
think all of us could save some time and heartache.
And also I guess when I see sleep in people, it seems like a painful process to also let go of a personal truth, right? And I do think that they struggle more in that realm of especially if you have sleep third, like moving on to the fourth animal and letting go of that personal truth for the sake of, let's say, blast, to even out the information and align the sleep with what is then, information-wise objectively true. That is going to be like a lot of pain involved. But so like blast last, I can imagine, and consume last, it's just going to be really painful because you're forced to update sleep. That is, I mean, it's sleep is safety in a way, right? It's the ability to like reassure yourself of your own truth, which we don't have, right? So for us, that process is maybe a little less painful, actually, lacking sleep.
I don't know that. I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's well. Just one point first is that I think that what the blast last struggle with is it actually sounds very similar to what Ben, what you're describing about like the identity thing, right? Because they'll also feel like, oh, see, in my world, I just understand it in a certain way. I just can't get it out. It's like I also can't get out what I want to say in the way that I want to say it. You know what I mean? It's like there's a very low fidelity of like what even this what we're sharing, the degree that I understand it and the degree and what I like.
The degree that it's coming out is
the degree that I can share it. It's just like of course there's gonna be like there's gonna be that off thing, and I think that. I mean, going back to
that's where the consume picks up some of the slack. Like that's the thing. Like if someone has consume and your blast isn't so great, the consume can pick up the slack and sort of like tell you what they're not getting and pull it out of you in a better way, so that it does come out in some way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what the play is also, right? Is that if you do share your play, like maybe it feels a little bit tough, or you share your sleep, whatever, right? It's almost the same. Like when you share your sleep, it does feel bad that people are like, I don't know, they have a reaction to it or whatever. But that kind of like leads to something, you know. I think going around, you're kind of like giving some like good advice, right, to both parties. I think one easy one for the energy doms is just have people around you that you have to explain things to, that you either don't like that or don't resonate with you. You know what I mean? That, yeah, and that will kind of challenge you, even though they're kind of abrasive or whatever, right? Like any one of us.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm.
And maybe for us is that we find a safe space where we feel like we can kind of share our sleep and be okay when people push it back on it, right? Where like, yeah, I think an example of like, it's like, I think sharing sleep is it sounds so corny. I think it's just like, even just like being, at least for me, play last, being okay with having an identity out there that's like, that feels to me that's like static, that I don't have control over, right? Again, what do I see the ISTPs that are really close to my type except blast last, is that they're all like, oh, I'm so blast last. Oh, I'm demon FE, I'm blast last. I'll never ever say that. I'll never say that. You know what I mean? It's like, why can I say that? But it's just because like I feel like I disagree with that. I'm not gonna verbalize anything that will go along with how the tribe sees me. You know what I mean? Or like, do you know what I mean? But I think that, yeah, anything that we can do to be less precious about that, and anything that they can do be less precious about their beliefs, even, right? Sharing your beliefs is being kind of, not sharing your beliefs is kind of being precious about them in a way.
Yeah.
I personally think one of the most painful things as my type, whatever it is, awkward, is being projected upon. It's very painful. Like, it's really painful to be projected upon, and especially when I know it's wrong. Like, I know it's wrong, and like what Uzair is saying is like, just be calm with that. When people do that, just be like, yeah, no, I don't think you're right. Here, let me tell you who I am. But like when the pushback comes and there's like the fight on, no, you're actually this. No, I'm not. Like that's a painful struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's leaning on sleep rather than blast, because it's like Catherine said earlier. And this is something I'm also trying to teach myself, whatever. But it's like when somebody, like, why did the sleep blast look like triggered in the classes and stuff? You know, they're constantly like, oh, you know, whatever. It's because like when we have sleep and we have an identity, and obviously, and it's like we're not sharing it, but when somebody contradicts that, our first instinct is to correct them, but then it's also a vulnerable place because we don't usually talk about sleep, so it's like the energy is like so heightened. But I think it is possible to be like, oh yeah, you're wrong. Then it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if people kind of see you're very like open with a lot of people, and because so let's say if there's a type twin in your thing, in your doc, and they're saying stuff about them, right, that you disagree or you don't resonate with, it's very difficult to be like, they're not talking about me, right? It's like, oh no, that's my label. My label is right here. That's me, right? Because that's the majority of me that's out there, in a way. So, and I think that if you have a you that's out there that's like been kind of reconciled with the tribe, then that's not that big of a deal, because just like people know who I am already. Then it doesn't matter what type I am on some level, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, do you guys have anything that you want to, where you want to go with this? Any final thoughts? Anything? Sounds like we kind of wrapped it up.
If anyone has a rebuttal, I'd love it.
Yeah.
Yes. We want the energy dom rebuttal.
Yeah. If any energy doms want to argue with us, come.
Yes. I would love that, actually.
We didn't talk too much about the social dynamics, I think, with info and energy. Did we? Did you guys want to talk about that really quick?
I think we did a little bit. Oh, we did a little bit. I think I'll share like one last. I think the really fun ones are like how info doms come off to energy doms and vice versa, right? I think that like one of the things that I get triggered by is, especially in the voice chat, is that if you hear someone's like long story about themselves, right? And it's just like, it's just
taking
long,
up the
right?
room.
It's taking up the room. It's just like, and I think the infodoms will feel like, why am I listening to you? Are you the president? Did you just come back from the moon? Like, why do I care about your biography, right? Just like, who the hell are you? You know?
Human Effie.
I just yeah. There's some Effie thrown in there a little bit. But I think they'll feel
that's
like,
sharing that's sharing your sleep. Like what you did just there, for example, is you sharing your sleep. Like this is what you're actually thinking, what's actually going on in your identity. But you would never say that, you would just bounce. Like
yeah, it'd be too abrasive. Even if I did say it, then I'd get some. There's no point in me saying it because then people will think I'm abrasive, right? And then my tribe identity will be abrasive, you know?
Right.
But on the flip side, I think if I go in the VC and I'm like, here's my new theory about info energy. I'm just like, who are you? Like, are you a professor in this? Do you have a degree? Like, you know what I mean? Oh, that's why the energy doms in some ways they actually respect these positions of like who this is
qualifications,
deep, but they I do think that they accept qualifications more because what they're really good at is that this person is this person in the tribe, this person's that person. That's what we get triggered by, right? It's that like, oh, I'm that person in the tribe, but like
he's
you know
qualified
what I mean? Like,
to give info. Yeah.
And then they'll listen a lot to that person, right? Like, oh, I heard this from this person, or like I'm going to share this. When they're saying that, they're like, oh, I got my information from this person. This identity person is really good. It's like, oh, that identity person is really good. Yeah, I really like what that really resonates with me. Oh, I'll have it resonate with me.
Right?
You know, like this is like an energy conversation.
Right?
I'm like, what part did you agree with? I disagree with this part. This is the NI from it. Like, none of that, right? It's just like, here's the source of the information. You can go get it.
Yeah.
I would say like that's the last part.
Well, this is really good, guys. You did a great job not discovering this, but observing this, I guess. And thank you so much for coming out and sharing it with the tribe. Sorry if I gave a little bit too much pushback, but
no,
we appreciate it.
I didn't even notice.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
Well, that was just my persona lying anyway, so it's all good. Have a good one, everyone. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to also link in the description. What are we calling it? A summary of this discussion?
Yeah, a quick summary.
Yeah.
A quick summary. All right. A little slideshow I put together. All right. Have a good one, guys.
Okay.